Hey friends, want to give a quick shout out and thank you to Lodgify who made this episode possible. If you aren't familiar with them already, you absolutely need to go give them a look, especially if you are a new hospitality entrepreneur. I always say that for somebody who's building a real hospitality business without the backing of a big management company, Lodgify is absolutely worth a look. It's a platform that I recommend for hosts who are entrepreneurial, but again, who are just starting out and or have a smaller portfolio and don't have huge aspirations to, scale to be a 250, properties under management sort of group. Lodgify is built for entrepreneurs. It's built for the next generation of great hospitalitarians. You can use the code BTS20 at lodgify.com for 20% off any yearly or bi-yearly plan. This offer is valid through October 31st. Again, BTS20 at lodgify.com. Thanks to the team there. They are so freaking responsive. Everyone I've talked to who's a customer of theirs has nothing but great things to say about their features and their customer service. So go give Lodgify a look if you haven't in a while, and tell them that Zach from Behind the Stays sent you their way.
When my parents would check into hotels or motels along the highway system or interstate highways, we were traveling from place to place, they would literally go to the front desk and say, "Can I have a key to inspect the room?" Right. And they would go in, they'd inspect the room, they'd see if they like it. And then if they did, they would, go to the front desk and pay for a night or not. And that's what the guest is having to do today. They're literally having to read descriptions because it's almost like the old school hotel inspection, right? Because there is no language of trust. And so they're having to do all the details.
In just a moment, you'll meet Ashley Ching, founder of InHaven, former head of global merchandising operations at Tiffany & Co., and the person behind what might be the most important piece of research the vacation rental industry has produced in years. Here's the question Ashley keeps asking. Every other hospitality industry, hotels, airlines, restaurants, car rentals, has what she calls language of trust, quality tiers that tell the consumer what they're buying before they arrive. But vacation rentals? Well, they don't. And that single missing layer is behind almost every structural problem the industry can't seem to solve. From review manipulation to failed scaling attempts to the reason you still can't build a transferable property management brand. Ashley walks us through the reasonable hospitality framework her team developed alongside property managers and Steve Joyce, the former CEO of Choice Hotels. We dig into why service standards matter more than furnishings in determining where you fall on the quality spectrum, this care coverage ratio concept that quantifies what boots on the ground actually means, and why every attempt to put standards at the individual property level has failed. She makes a compelling case that most operators calling themselves luxury probably aren't. And that's not an insult because only 3% of U.S. hotel supply is actually luxury, and there's excellence at every tier. We talk about the luxury fallacy, why a Hampton Inn with an 8.2 rating doesn't mean it's better than a Ritz-Carlton with a 7.8 rating, and what the industry could look like in 10 years if it finally gets this foundation of language of trust right. Ashley's incredibly smart. This was a super fun conversation. Download her team's research in the show notes below. Thank you, Ashley, for taking the time out of your very busy life to put this research together for us today. Ladies and gents, enjoy this conversation with Ashley Ching. All right, Ashley, we are live. Welcome to Behind the Stays. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
So nice to be back again.
It's been a while since we talked. Lots has changed, but I think what's been consistent, Ashley, is every once in a while you just pop into my algorithm, you pop into my my LinkedIn feed, and I see another piece of thoughtful research or a perspective that just, again, feels incredibly well thought through and also timely, right? I see a lot of timely content, not well thought through. See some well thought through content that's not always timely, but you've got a magic of doing both. So I wanted to have you back on the podcast because you've continued to do great work and really helping the industry think through standardization, think through professionalization. And so I want to talk about your latest research and just anything that you guys have learned at Inhaven over the last few years, couple years in particular since we chatted, that will be helpful and applicable to those tuning into today's conversation. But as a quick refresher, because the audience has grown a lot, and folks might not remember you from the last time you were on the podcast, but you spent over a decade at Tiffany & Co. running global merchandising. Then you were at Home Depot's company store for a while. Can you give us a quick just refresher on how someone goes from like luxury jewelry and housewares to redesigning how vacation rentals operate? What's the through line there?
Yeah, so I actually think my background very much maps naturally to vacation rentals. As you mentioned, at Tiffany & Company, I led global merchandising operations where I set the global standards while making them locally relevant. So I moved over to Asia and I was responsible for delivering, what are the national Tiffany standards in Beijing versus Sydney? And so really the question we were asking is, how do we create this consistent brand experience without eliminating what makes that market unique? And ultimately, why does someone choose Tiffany over a local jeweler? And a huge part of why they choose Tiffany is because of the trust and service. And then I went on to the company store, which is a Home Depot company, and got really into the business of bed, bath, and kitchen. And at the end of the day, in hospitality, that's what we're built around, right? We're in the business of making sure people can sleep, bathe, and eat comfortably. And so that's really, my background. But we're going to talk today about this study that we recently launched on reasonable hospitality. And I wouldn't say that was just developed by me sitting here in my office. It really brings together my team. So Megan Myers, who has her own podcast as well. She's head of growth at Inhaven, and she was formerly with 360 Blue in Destin, and she ran Outpost Vacation Rentals in Jackson, Wyoming. And we've got a great gentleman by the name of Steve Joyce, who's the former CEO of Choice Hotels. He's our head advisor on our board here at Inhaven. And so working with Megan, with the team, with Steve, we've really been able to develop this framework. But most importantly, it's really the property managers that we work with day in and day out. We work very closely with them. We help them scale their businesses. We see their problems. And so bringing all these perspectives together is really, what has helped us create all this great research and content for the industry.
So I want to hear a little bit about you guys, started as a B2B e-commerce platform, if you will, right? Folks can use Inhaven to get awesome discounts on great products, right? Whether they're furnishing a small condo or a large luxury vacation rental on the beach, right? People use you guys at least historically, and I, you correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe primarily to be able to help them furnish their properties for their respective businesses. You could have built a great business just doing that. There are other folks that that kind of just do that. Help us understand why the need to take on this big I don't know, mission, if you will, to help the industry professionalize itself in the same way that the hotel world has done, previously, in the same way that luxury brands, as you just mentioned, your experience with Tiffany & Company has done. Why does that feel critical to you beyond just being something you might personally care about? Why is that important for Inhaven's business?
Yeah, so we've at Inhaven have always been focused on helping our clients, which are property managers, really deliver a better experience, not only to their vacation rental guests, but to also their owners. And so we started with procurement, as you mentioned, because our customers were constantly saying, I can't consistently source the right products for hundreds of homes. And so we solved that. And so then they came back to us and said, all right, now I have 300 homes. How do I make sure that I have the right inventory amounts? How do I replenish those homes? How do I charge homeowners for these products? And how do I onboard homes consistently? And so what we did was we built an inventory management tool, which is the operational infrastructure that helps them manage all of those components. And so now the conversations with our clients are becoming much more strategic. So they're grappling not only with home quality, but with increasingly and somewhat extortionary guest reviews. And they're asking questions like, okay, people have tried to scale in this industry like Resort Quest, Vacasa, Sonder, and all have failed. And so that led us to these conversations and really strategy sessions with our property managers. And through those sessions, we realized we were really uncovering some fundamental structural challenges in the industry. And so we decided to publish the research that we've done so that people can see how we're thinking about it differently and how we're helping our property managers better scale their businesses.
And how can you unpack that for us a little bit? Like in this research, right? Where does it start in your, like, I guess what was the initial revelation from your perspective that, oh my gosh, there is something, there's a huge opportunity here. There's something critically important for the industry here. What was that first data point or that initial realization that you and the team had, again, to kind of justify the time and the effort, the energy spent in helping bring these ideas and these insights to the wider market?
Yeah, I think the biggest realization that we had is that every hospitality industry, whether you're in hotels, restaurants, airlines, car rentals, have a language of trust, right? They have quality tiers, and that is completely lacking from the vacation rental industry. And with the lack of quality tiers and that language of trust, there's an over reliance on OTAs. Guests are dissatisfied because they're reviewing something where they don't have expectations set ahead of time. And so it creates a lot of, diseconomies of scale and whatnot. And so we said, all right, let's set out to develop, like, what would that language of trust look like for the vacation rental industry? And so we published this paper that's called Reasonable Hospitality, and we published our framework, which says at the end of the day, it's, you have to start with standards. And standards, we have two levels or two components of standards. We've got service standards and we have quality standards. And so on the service standards perspective, we look at, leadership. Is the leadership local? Can they make decisions? You always hear people say, oh, I've got boots on the ground. But what does that truly mean? Vacasa had boots on the ground. It's just that none of their local teams could actually make any decisions, right, for their business. So, do you truly have leadership that can make decisions on the ground within 2 hours from every home? The second component of leadership is care. How many humans do you have supporting these homes? What is your people to property ratio? How much care are you able to deliver? The third is experience. What level of experience are you providing your guests? Are you providing concierge services, or is it an app, like a lot of technology where the guests can kind of form their experience? And fourth is operations. Do you have a local office? Do you have the infrastructure to support these homes? So we look at those components of service. And then we have the quality perspective. How do you outfit the bed, bath, and kitchen? And there's different quality tiers. So once you set those standards, you can then go to the next level, which is creating that language of trust. And that's along 3 different tiers that we've defined. Signature being your highest luxury, premium being your upper upscale, and then lifestyle, more of your economy mid-scale homes. And so for each level, so from premium or from signature to premium to lifestyle, you have different levels of service and comfort quality standards that attribute to what makes that each tier excellent. So then once you have that language of trust, right, now you have a lot of efficiencies when it comes to alignment. Your guests know, or your guests know what to expect. Your owners know how to furnish the homes and what's to be expected of you. The property managers can staff the teams accordingly and define the service levels. And then the distribution channels can better market those stays based on who's coming to them. And through all of that, you're able to gain a lot of value and scale by having this tiered structure in place.
Hey guys, so I was talking to an STR host that I know last week, and she found out that when someone opens ChatGPT and types, find me a cabin in the Smokies for a long weekend, her neighbor's place is coming up, but hers isn't. She kept trying to reprompt it, but couldn't find her place. It's in the same town. It's a similar property. It's got similar reviews, right? So there's nothing remarkably different between the properties, except for the fact that her neighbor has a direct booking website built the right way, and she just has an Airbnb and Vrbo listing. As we know, as you've heard about ad nauseum at this point, AI is becoming the new front door for travel discovery, and most hosts don't even have a doorbell, so to speak. ChatGPT isn't scrolling Airbnb listings. It's pulling from websites that it can actually read. Again, for context here, ChatGPT has very limited access, if any access, to Airbnb proper, What it does have access to is loads and loads of websites, and it uses websites to read, contextualize, and recommend places to travel to users who are prompting it. So what this really means is that if your property lives exclusively on someone else's platform, like Airbnb or Vrbo, you're basically invisible to the next generation of how people find places to stay. Even if you have your own direct booking site, but you haven't optimized it for AI, so to speak, and you haven't made it searchable and contextually relevant to agents, same thing, right? Like you're just not being discovered. Lodgify fixes that. So Lodgify's direct booking website is built to get found by AI. They call Lodgify the new AI PMS, their channel manager, their guest messaging payments. It's all in one place and everything talks to each other. Furthermore, Lodgify takes 0% on direct bookings. That's right. So if you generate a direct booking, Lodgify is giving all of that cash money to you. So the money the guest pays is the money that you keep. And again, if you're not familiar with PMSs, most of them do this, but Lodgify definitely does this. When a guest pays, you get paid immediately, right? So you don't have to wait until check-in or, in some cases, check out, like Airbnb often makes you wait. And their AI co-host handles guest communication around the clock, so you're not the one texting the Wi-Fi password is on the fridge at 2 a.m. anymore. So if you're an owner-operator, someone who's building a real hospitality business without the backing of a big management company, Lodgify is the platform that I recommend for you, full stop. You can use the code BTS20, that's BTS for behind the stays 20 at lodgify.com for 20% off any yearly or bi-yearly plan. This offer is valid through October 31st, 2026 of this year. So again, even if you have a PMS already, it's always good to audit. It's always good to go do some shopping around, right? Lodgify makes it really easy to transfer, but go check out Lodgify if you haven't already, or if it's been a while since you've checked them out. Check them out again. Use the code BTS20 at lodgify.com and or tell someone on the team that Zach from Behind the Stays sent you their way. I love that you separated like service from quality because I think that those get inflated a lot or conflated a lot, I should say. And the hotel world, those also kind of blur a little bit in the hotel world, right? You obviously kind of expect top tier service as you move up the food chain. But
Sure.
but it is also, I think, some of the best service I have had or the best product I've had the worst service, and then some of the best service I've had, even the product wasn't great, right? So love that those are distinct. I think that's incredibly smart and helpful to the consumer. I want to understand. I love the broader mission, right? Because as a consumer, right, when I go and I check into a Courtyard, right, Marriott, right, my expectations are going to be different than a Ritz or an Edition. The basics need to be there, right? But like I know what I'm getting into. But I think you're spot on. I could book what looks like a beautiful vacation rental home on the beach in the Outer Banks, and it could be like really, really, really crappy beds, really, really, really crappy linens, even though it's like a beautiful property, maybe even on the water, right? And so I think that this work is critically important. My question for you is how when you talk about language of trust, how are you thinking folks position their offerings like on an OTA or even on their website? Like are you encouraging folks to say things like, hey, Zach's got a collection of lifestyle vacation rentals, and that's what this means. We're not trying to be signature. We're not trying to be premium. Like, talk to me a little bit about how you think this language of trust gets communicated from a marketing perspective, right? You talked about so OTAs can better recommend, for instance, right, the right properties to the right consumer segment. What do you think that looks like tangibly?
Yeah. So I think, it's really important. I think right now the industry over relies on reviews,
Mm,
right? To your point, right? You can have a 5-star, Motel 6 stay, and you can have a 3-star Ritz-Carlton stay.
yeah.
But as a consumer, we have different expectations for a Motel 6 stay versus a Ritz-Carlton. And so what the vacation rentals, they're overly reliant on these reviews, but reviews are, there's no level of expectations. So there's no control that the property manager has over what that guest is reviewing, because they're literally, it's based on their own expectations they've made up. So I think this language of trust, we're starting with a group of property managers that have about 3,000 homes. And as we go out and we communicate this language of trust and we work with our B2B partners, it'll become more, and as we grow and grow this group of like-minded professionals, it'll become more, I guess, known to the guests as they're trying to stay in these homes. They understand what a signature home gives versus a lifestyle home. So I think that language of trust is really important, and we've got to start somewhere. Right now, we rely way too heavily on reviews, and the system's completely broken.
It's almost like I think about this when I'm looking at a home, whether it's on Airbnb or some other OTA and or even direct booking site. I'm always looking for again, some messaging or some sign, I guess is the word I'm looking for, that it's going to meet whatever my level of expectation for the trip is. And one of the ways I do it is do they name drop mattress companies, or do they name drop appliances in the listing? So for example, if someone talks about having a wolf stove, right, or having an avocado sort of mattress, whatever it might be, when they name drop the brands of the products that they have in their home in the description, that helps me as a consumer understand okay, these people get quality, or they understand premium. You're not just marketing sort of a bright, airy kitchen. You're also taking the time to tell me it's a chef's kitchen with Wolf appliances. That means something to some level of consumer base who probably cares about those things. So when you think about, maybe that's a silly example, but do you think about
it's great. It's a great example.
Those sorts of things of helping your partners think hey, let's drop this kind of use these brand names versus if someone talks about their IKEA couch, right? Nothing wrong against IKEA couches, but I might also understand that, okay, maybe this is a lifestyle product versus the signature product.
Yeah, two things. One is we are very much in the state. So as you explain, you're reading the listing description. You're oh, there's a Wolf range. That must be a nice place, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the same parallel to what we used to do in the 80s when my parents would check into hotels or motels along the highway system or interstate highways. We were traveling from place to place. They would literally go to the front desk and say, "Can I have a key to inspect the room?" Right. And they would go in, they'd inspect the room, they'd see if they like it. And then if they did, they would, go to the front desk and pay for a night or not. And that's what the guest is having to do today. They're literally having to read descriptions because it's almost like the old school hotel inspection, right? Because there is no language of trust. And so they're having to do all the details. And I would say, though, the other thing on this point is that while, the furnishings signal luxury versus economy, what we found through our research is the number one distinguishing factor between the quality tiers is service levels. So it's really the people to property ratio that you're looking at. So just think about hotels. When you check into an economy level hotel, there's one person in the lobby. Yep. Versus if you check into a luxury hotel, there's 10 people. There's someone to push the elevator button there for you. Same with the restaurant industry. If you're going to McDonald's, you're ordering on a kiosk and maybe one person gives you the food. Versus I went to a 5-star Michelin restaurant in Chicago for my dad's 80th, and we had a million people caring for us and taking care. And that warranted a $450, per person bill at the end of the night because of all the different experiences we got. And so really what we find is the number one distinguishing factor is service levels. And so how do you communicate those service levels? It's through this care ratio coverage that we have.
So I want to dive into that a little bit. And you talk about this is I think what you're hitting on a little bit here too. There's the line in the report where you talk about standards are not quality controls; they're coordination mechanisms. Can you unpack what exactly that means, and then how does that relate to this service standard? These standards of service that are really seem to be the distinguishing factors between how you fall on the scale from economy to luxury.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the most important concepts in the paper. As I mentioned before, every other hospitality industry has this language of trust, and which tells the consumer what kind of experience that they're buying before they arrive. Hotels have their chain scale, airlines have their, low-cost carriers to private airplanes, and vacation rentals don't have that language today. So it was through our research and through our conversations across hospitality, and working with our property managers day in and day out, that we came out with this reasonable hospitality framework. And so these are quantifiable service standards. And as I mentioned, on service, we've got the leadership, care, experience, and operations, and we break that down into tiers. So there's different standards for an economy level stay, or what we call lifestyle, versus a signature. And so those generally map out. And then we've got the comfort level quality tiers as well. So from, bed, bath, and kitchen, what do those tiers look like? And so that third level right now that gets you to is that predictability dividend. And so once everyone understands that promise, suddenly all the stakeholders around the guest experience can make those aligned decisions. And so that's when we can see that truly an industry can scale. Does that answer your question around service?
Yeah, 100%. And maybe maybe a better way of even framing the question a little bit is, you make this distinction that the rating, like the quality standards, the service standards, should really be at the property like manager level versus like the individual property, which like at first I sort of paused and I was like, oh, should it be? But then I was thinking, well, from a brand trust perspective, right? Am I more likely to like start as a consumer with a high level of trust if I hear St. Regis, or if I see like an individual photo of one St. Regis hotel, like in a city I've never been to? Probably like the former, meaning like I identify first and foremost with the brand, right? Which I think we could translate to the manager in this context, versus the actual, physical hotel itself. That is also an important consideration, but it's maybe a second level of importance from an initial consumer perspective. So I guess help us understand a little bit about how you guys came to that conclusion. Like, why is it? Because the vast majority, quite frankly, right, of property managers, vacation rental managers, their brands are not known by the general public. Yes, there are people, right, who over time build cult followings, right? But when you think about, and we've talked about this ad nauseum on this show, right? The vast majority of consumer calls any vacation home an Airbnb, right? And like that is just true. Now maybe it's shifting a little bit today, but I guess the question I'm getting at is, why did you guys land on the quality and service thresholds really needing to be at the property management level versus the individual asset, the home level?
Yeah, I think, in every other hospitality industry, their assets are single use. So if you think about a hotel, for example, it's like purpose built for a hotel, and all of its stakeholders are aligned with one, they have one thing in mind. How do I get a good return on this asset?
Yep.
Right. So they're all aligned. Same with airlines, right? The airline, the airplane is built for that purpose. It's a single use asset. It's not used for any other purpose but to to get passengers from point A to point B. Vacation rentals are very different because they are dual use assets. You've got the homeowners who, yes, they want to have an economic return, but they also want to spend 6 weeks in that home during the summertime.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They love their pink sheets and they don't want to get rid of their pink sheets, even though from a hospitality perspective, the guests want white. So you've got this, you don't actually have control over the single property. That's where the homeowner has control. Where you have control to define the standards is at the property manager level. Because that property manager defines what are the service levels going to be? How am I going to staff this company? What services am I going to provide? And they also primarily, most property managers, professional ones, define how are those items that are, those high velocity items like the bed, the bath, the kitchen replenished. And so they are the ones that have control over those two areas. And that's why we, say that every attempt at putting the standards at the property level hasn't worked. You need to put it at the property manager level because that's where we see control in this industry in terms of service and quality.
So then do you think there is space, right, for a property manager to exist in multiple levels, right? Because you see folks with portfolios, for example, right, that span maybe at least the top two, right? Many that might span all three. I guess, how do you wrestle with that reality?
Yeah, it's a question that keeps coming up. We talk a lot about this with our property managers. When you talk to most experienced property managers, 90% of their homes are aligned with one tier. And then they might have, so let's say that they're 90% of the homes align with the premium tier, and they have 5% that are signature and 5% that are lifestyle.
Yeah.
Their 5% that are lifestyle, because their operations are built around a premium tier, those are not profitable because they're over servicing those homes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the 5% that are signature are getting bad reviews because those guests would expect higher levels of services at signature. And so through time, those homes will shed and they'll focus on their premium. It's also, if you look at the hotel space, and we're not saying that one tier is worse than the other. I think that's a big message, is you can be excellent at each tier. But if you look at the hotel space, an extended stay America has a very different operating model than a Four Seasons. So extended stay America is run at very high occupancy and very high margins, but they have lower valuations because it's very easy to set up a competing business around the corner.
Yep.
Whereas if you look at a Four Seasons, they have very low operating margins, sometimes 6 or 7% operating margins, but their valuations are like 57 times because it's very hard to replicate that experience.
Yep.
Right? It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of people. And so you have to decide as a business owner, where do you want to be? And then you align your operations to be the most, to align with that operating model. And so when you're spanning across multiple tiers, it becomes very inefficient for your team.
So do you guys see as, I want to actually talk, before I ask that question, I actually want to talk about the care coverage ratio, because you talked about it a little bit, but I don't think we unpacked it enough here. Mm-hmm. You talked specifically about sort of this key distinguisher about like where you fall is again based off of care, is based off of service. I think you go so far as to say like, there's a specific employee count, right? And these exclude like 1099 contractors, like these are actually FTEs like that work at these companies. You have to meet these different thresholds to enter these respective tiers. Unpack this for us, because you guys came up with this at In-Haven. Why is this important, and how does it I guess further maybe the argument that you've been making over the last several minutes here on the importance of service being one at the local level, but then also an operator choosing to and really sticking to a specific tier?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, the greatest differentiator in quality tiers is service, we believe. And it's really, it goes back to what I just said about, the number of people in the hotel lobbies, those guest facing people, or the number of people that are servicing you at a restaurant around the table. And so we purposely exclude cleaning staff and vacation rentals because, one, it can skew the average, it can be skewed by the average stay. So if the average stay is only 2 days, you need much more cleaners, right, than if your average stay is 5. And it can also be skewed by the size of the homes. And so, we know that cleaning teams are critical members of your team, just as dishwashers are in a restaurant or ground staff on an airlines. But for those industries, what determines the quality tier are the frontline service employees.
Yep.
Those are the concierge, the valets at the hotels, the maitre d's and sommeliers at restaurants. And so we charted that data for our property managers. And what we found was pretty consistent. Our signature or, top tier homes operate at more of like a 1 service staff member to every 5 properties. Our premium are operating more of 1 to 10. Our lifestyle are 1 to 15. And just to put it in perspective, Vacasa and Sonder were operating at like a 1 to 20.
Wow. Okay. Very, very interesting.
So
I'm thinking about this, and this is really meant to, not to quiz you here, but more to be like a brainstorm. Like if I'm a vacation rental manager and I'm, let's say, in the premium tier, and I buy into like the importance of this, and I buy into that, hey, we do as an industry, we believe that this is critical to attract the kind of guests that we want to attract, to stay competitive, right? To really build. Maybe not everyone wants to build a Four Seasons like brand, but I think most of the operators, at least that I know, they care deeply about their brand, right? And they've invested so much in building their brand that eventually someday they probably want that brand to trade at a higher valuation than a brand maybe or maybe at an operator that did not build a brand, right? That built a great portfolio maybe, but their brand isn't known to the consumer. How do you help people think through how this translates to positioning? We touched on this a little bit, but like, but if I've got 50 luxury vacation homes, but I call them luxury, maybe they're really like maybe they're really the premium category. How do you where do I start in terms of like a communication perspective, in terms of brand, trusted language that I start using either with my team, in my comms, etc., to start building towards, I think, this ideal state that you guys have outlined, where the consumer recognizes, right, beyond the pictures, right, beyond the reviews, that this is going to be the kind of experience that I'm looking for. Like, where do you encourage people to start?
Yeah, it's really starting with that pyramid that we've outlined in Reasonable Hospitality, the case study. And you start with the service standards and the quality standards, the standards level, and they're pretty quantifiable, right? And so it's not something that's subjective. It's, literally asking questions like, under service, what does my local leadership look like? What types of service am I providing? What's my care coverage ratio? What's my local infrastructure? And then on the quality perspective, it's pretty clear on terms of what level, how am I furnishing these homes? And so you can't be furnishing at a signature level, but providing a lifestyle service, right? That
Yeah.
means that your lifestyle overall, just like a Motel 6 can't put in Sephora sheets and call it a signature property,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. 100%.
so I think there's alignment around the standards, which are very clear. And then it's sort of, once you've got those standards in place, then you're able to talk in that language of trust. You're able to align your owners, your guest, your team around those services and standards. And so that just everything becomes more efficient. And I think in general, the industry, you always hear people talking about luxury. I want to be luxury. And I think it's really important, and we talk about this in the case study about the luxury fallacy, that only 3% of US hotel supply is actually luxury.
Mm,
Most consumers want to stay in mid-scale or upscale hotels. And for me personally, I travel along that chain scale all year long, right? Like I will, pay up for a 4-season stay for a special anniversary weekend with my husband. But if I'm traveling across country for a soccer tournament, I am totally fine staying at the Hampton Inn.
yeah.
In some
Yep.
cases, the Motel 6. I'm not fine with Ashley's Motel across the street. Who knows what happens there? But I want that. I have that trust in those brand standards. And so I think what we try to communicate in this case study is there's excellence at each tier. And so it's really aligning your organization and your team around what you're trying to deliver, and then delivering excellence at that tier.
So in other words, what I hear you saying is like, you commit, you and your team commit to a tier, you ensure that you're delivering excellence at that tier, and then over time, right, the general consumer will come to know that, okay, this is the kind of experience that I can expect from Ashley's, premium vacation rentals, right? And so the idea of like solving today for consumer facing language or consumer facing marketing, right, in particular, that helps evoke this sense of trust, that comes maybe at a later point.
No, stay tuned.
Okay,
There's
good.
stuff coming,
Okay,
maybe even before this podcast launches.
amazing. Okay.
So we have a whole plan with our group of property managers. But yes, this will become consumer facing. And we, if you're out there and you're a property manager and you want to be a part of this, we would love to talk to you and hear from you, because we have a very strong launch plan on this.
What are your? I like to just kick around ideas too. So obviously, if you guys are maybe you're building this already. But what are your thoughts on, like, there've been a few folks who've popped up recently who are trying to build like, niche or verticalized like OTAs, and they would probably be offended if I called them an OTA. So like, apologies, don't want to offend anyone. But basically, like, sites that aggregate, right, supply of a specific kind. Do you think like there's a world in which we see more things like the 100 collection, where you get folks together, they they're all at the signature tier, right? And then there's a collective investment in building a consumer facing brand around the signature tier. Like, again, things like this have been tried, but I think the framework that you have delivered is the clearest articulation of a foundation, right, that I believe something like this could then be built on. But I guess what's your thought on, like, from a consumer perspective? Because what is wildly hard is it's very, very difficult, even if you're a top tier VRM, to outcompete from a marketing perspective any OTA. Like it's wildly difficult. Now maybe you don't need that, right? Maybe you've got your return guests, or just your ratio is incredible and like you don't care. And that's fine. But if you're maybe a newer hospitality entrepreneur getting into the space and you aspire to build the Four Seasons of vacation rentals, you're going to need, it's going to take some time to build that brand. So I guess this is a long way of asking a relatively
Hmm.
simple question, which is what kind of consumer layer, even aggregate consumer layer, do you think could exist or should exist on top of these respective pillars? If you even think that that's a good idea.
Well, first of all, I think the attempts that have been done so far have been very much at the property level, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, let's take this collection of 5 properties and put it on a website or
Yeah.
whatnot. And so what we are saying is we're taking a very different approach and saying we are selecting the property managers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those property managers are the ones who can deliver the best services and standards to the industry, right? And so that's a very differentiated approach. I think OTAs will continue to struggle because these niche, whatever we want to call them, OTAs, because they're looking at pictures from AI perspective, like it looks nice, right? But it could be a really crappy mattress and crappy sheets or whatnot. They just can't tell the quality. And so at Inhaven, we see what our property managers are purchasing. We see them allocating to the homes, and we can guarantee
Mm.
that those standards from a quality perspective are in place. We also visit our property managers. We are working with their teams on a day in and day out basis. We can see, what is their local office like? What are their operations like? So we're really vetting these property managers as well and vetting their service standards. And so we haven't seen anyone do that for the industry. It's all, either AI photos or, and I think that's what's led to a lot of lack of trust. Because a guest then is expecting, okay, on one fine stay or whatnot, I'm going to get the best stay. And then they show up to, really crappy sheets, service levels of hosts being hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
And so that's been the big disappointment. So I think, we've taken a very different approach where we vet the property manager, we vet their purchases, we vet their service standards. And so that will give more trust, in terms of Inhaven and our program.
I booked I've told this story on this podcast before, but I booked
Mhm.
a home on Plum Guide in Europe, and
Mhm.
Plum Guide is at
Mhm.
least presents itself as an exclusive OTA, right? Invite only, at least at one point in time, and luxury supply. And again, by the time we got to the home, it was wonderful and great and whatever. But we got a call as we landed with my at the time 6-month-old son after an overnight flight, and they called and they were basically like, the home's not available, and they were like, what? We were at the airport. It was a total shit show. Long story short, there was a mix up. We ended up getting our original place, and they did whatever they could to try to make up for it, which was great. And the home itself was beautiful. But to your point, Ashley, the minute I got that call, my trust in that brand, which I had always held in such high regard, completely evaporated, because I was like, what? You're leaving me, leaving me stranded here? So yes,
Mhm.
the supply that they had was nicer than the supply that they had in that Airbnb had in that particular area. But with it came quite frankly, horrible service. So makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So how do you think about you kind of compare this in the research, a $2,500 a night Vermont State and $135 a night shipping container on Airbnb, both with perfect ratings, and both have their Airbnb's guest favorite badges. But you're arguing reviews alone can't kind of organize a market. You've touched on this a little bit, but unpack this slightly further for us. What do you really mean by that?
Yeah, we really believe that reviews need context. We make this a comparison in hotels. You can have a Ritz-Carlton with a 7.8 review and a Hampton Inn with an 8.2 review. But does that mean that the Hampton Inn is higher quality than the Ritz-Carlton? Of course not.
Yeah.
But what it means is that the Hampton Inn may have done a better job meeting the expectations of the Hampton Inn guest.
Mm.
Right. And so
Mhm.
that's the distinction. We find that reviews are retrospective and tiers are perspective. And so the tier tells me what I should expect before I buy. And then the review tells me whether you've delivered on that expectation. And so, vacation rentals today are trying to make reviews do both jobs, and they can't. So we need a language that tells the guest what they're buying before the booking happens. And then the reviews become dramatically more useful because they're measuring against what the understood promise is.
When you guys think about service, right, and that again is the recurring theme, is service is the differentiator.
Mhm.
One of the biggest differences, obviously, between a vacation rental and a hotel is when you go to a hotel, you kind of expect service because like you need it, right? Like you don't have a kitchen in your room. Like you're likely going to the restaurant. You are likely in a new city and want to understand, where should I go for dinner, right? Or you want to drink at the bar downstairs before you go to sleep. Like the need for service, if you will, is greater. It's expected, right? Given sort of the actual constraints of the 380 square foot, whatever it is, room that you're staying in, right? Uh, that doesn't always translate to vacation rentals, right? Oftentimes people book vacation rentals to not be in a hotel, right? Like they want their own space. It's multifamily or multi-generational, often, not always, right? How do you think about this? Where I might have the most incredible time, and from a furnishings perspective, like it's top notch, but I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't need to talk to anyone, right? Whereas in the hotel context, that could be the distinguishing factor between an exceptional experience and like an average experience is my interaction with the staff. In a vacation rental context, that's one, it's just harder and it's different. My question for you is, given how much you emphasize service and that importance, how do you think about when service isn't wanted and or needed like it is in a traditional hotel context?
Come on, Zach, you're cutting out a little bit. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
Can you hear
sorry.
me?
Uh, did you? Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I caught it. I think I caught it. Yeah, sorry. My phone's cutting out a little bit. But I think the biggest, so let me just talk to you about service. Let's look at Rachel All Day in Abode. They do about 4 or 5 pre-arrival inspections before the guest arrives. They inspect the home 30 minutes before the guest arrives to make sure that there isn't a fly that's flown into the toilet before the guest arrives. The home is lit when the guest comes up. They're there to greet the guests, to take them through the home, answer how the speaker system works, answer how to turn the hot tub on, make the questions. They're there to, Moving Mountains in Colorado provides van services to and from the mountain for skiing. There's all these different services, these concierge level services that you can provide even in a vacation rental. You can make the reservations and whatnot. Versus a more lifestyle tier, you have the local team in place. They can be there, within a couple hours if the Wi-Fi is down or whatnot. But a lot of the service is delivered on a app, right? Where they have, recommended restaurants and whatnot. So there's a lot more technology introduced into that. So very similarly that you have in hotels or restaurants, you can provide levels of service based on those quality tiers.
Yeah, well said, well said. And then and Rachel is such a great example of I think the creme de la creme here in terms of how and Robin and all the incredible work he did at Moving Mountains. So those are wonderful examples. I want to you end the paper by talking about this, or you use a specific line which I thought was very well written. So I'm just going to quote it directly. It says, "Hospitality creates memories, standards build industries." If you get this right, what does this industry look like in 10 years that it doesn't look like today? So in other words, if we believe this to be true, and if all the effort that you guys are doing, if people buy into it, if there's real momentum that's built both from a consumer perspective but also an operator perspective around these ideals, where do you think this goes? Like at the end of the day, why is this so unbelievably critical from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, our property managers have been asking us this question for years. Like, why is the vacation rental industry the only industry without a national brand? Why don't we have meaningful loyalty programs? Why is it so difficult to sell a property management company without a massive earnout or requiring the founder to stay involved for years? Right. And I think all of those are symptoms of this underlying problem. The experience isn't predictable enough without the individual operator behind it. And that's where the predictability dividend that we talk about becomes really powerful. Because when you have standards, tiers, and a recognizable hospitality promise, the business becomes less dependent on that particular founder or that particular home. The guest understands what they're buying. The owner understands what they're investing in. And the managers know how to operate. And the distribution partners, like the OTAs, know how to sell it. And so once that promise can be repeated across hundreds or thousands of independently owned homes, you can start building things that are very different than how they're built today. You can build national brands because the brand actually stands for something consistent. You can build loyalty programs because the guests can trust that the next stay will deliver a comparable, level of hospitality. And you can create more valuable and transferable property management businesses because the operating model doesn't rely entirely on the founders itself. And so I think that you ultimately open up new forms of distribution, financing, investment around the industry. And that's why we say hospitality creates memories, standards build industries. The memories can still happen at that individual home, but the standards are what allow everything around that home to become scalable, investable, and enduring.
Well, I feel like that's a mic drop moment right there, Ashley. That was that was so well said, and I think you're spot on. It's a long time. It's been too long, quite frankly, that the industry has. There have been attempts, I think, at versions of this, but yours is the most kind of coherent and believable, quite frankly. And so I think the question just becomes, how do you get right? And I know you guys have already had some success here, which is really exciting. But how do you get more people to buy into this with this way of thinking? How do you get more people to think critically about how they're positioning, how they're building their portfolios? They aren't just taking on any property, any owner, right? But they're being incredibly strategic about how they do this. And I think that the work that you guys are doing is so critical, is so important. And I wish you guys the best of luck. And I'm sure folks tuning in to this conversation want to know more about this and want to think about this as they think about building their own portfolios. We've got folks who listen to this podcast who are building their own hotels, but many of whom have both vacation rentals and hotels and whatnot, and are trying to figure out what is the loyalty solution, or what is the brand solution with my hotels that I can carry over into my vacation rentals. So if folks want to just learn more about this way of thinking, I'll have obviously a link to whatever link you want to give me for folks to access the report. But anywhere else that you direct folks, if they want to understand a little bit more about the research, if they want to understand your way of thinking, and if they want to figure out, hey, how do I sign me up? What do I do? What is, I guess, the core call to action that you would encourage folks to take?
Yeah, I'd love to hear directly from you. So my email is Ashley, ASHLEY, at inhaven.com. You can always sign up for Inhaven, but I'd love to hear directly from everyone. The conversations are very fun, and we continue to learn more and apply, different ways of thinking to these studies.
Wonderful. Well, I will have your email linked in the show notes below then. Ashley, thank you so much for the time. Thanks to you and the team for the great work, and we will chat again soon.
Thanks, Zach. Take care.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us for this episode of Behind the Stays. I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram at Behind the Stays, or send me an email at zach@journey.com. If this is your first time tuning in, it's a pleasure to have you, and we hope to have you back again soon. But if you've been a listener for a while, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd subscribe to the show if you aren't already, and then leave us a rating and review of the show wherever you're streaming this podcast. Oh, and if you know a hotelier or a hospitality entrepreneur that's building something new and novel, I invite you to introduce them to me so that my team and I can discuss bringing them on the show. Again, you can just shoot me an email at zach@journey.com or a DM on Instagram. Behind the Scenes is brought to you by Journey, a next-generation loyalty program built for the modern traveler. We're looking to onboard new boutique hotels, unique stays, and the top vacation rental management companies onto our platform every day. If you're a hospitality entrepreneur who has a stay or a collection of stays with soul, we'd love for you to apply to join our alliance at journey.com/alliance. Again, that's journey.com/alliance. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will see you next time.